In this marketplace, there's a lot of things that people are selling that you don't need. And so you do need to know what you need or you don't need.
Hello, and welcome to Calling Capital, where we interview leading investors and operators in the private markets. I'm your host, Brendan Marshall. Let's get started.
My name is Derek. I run strategic partnerships here at Flow. And today I'm pleased that we have an extra special guest, Hunter Chen, who is the Vice President of Finance at 9 Yards Capital, a FinTech and supply chain focused manager who started off with just $45 million in AUM and has grown to now nearly $1 billion. So Hunter, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Derek. It's an absolute pleasure to be here.
I have for you a few questions, rapid fire, if you're open for it. If you could only listen to one song for the rest of your life, what would it be and why?
Probably something by Ross Stewart. I like his raspy voice. It's really calming. Forever Young.
I like it. They'll keep you forever young. What's your favorite book?
Animal Farm. Animal Farm. It's a very short book that we read in high school. I reread it recently, and it's just in high school. I read it. I'm like, I don't understand what's going on. This makes no sense. Like, yeah, I understand that the allegory for revolution, but like, how are people like that? Like, are people really like that? And now that I'm older and I read this, like, wow, this is spot on. People really are like that.
It's relevant again, for better or worse. Is it becoming relevant yet again? And then lastly, a lot of us need to unwind in life. What helps you relax and unwind at the end of the day?
Oh gosh, I spend time with my daughter. I have a and she's so much fun. If I need to take a break from her, I'll go do some cycling.
Love it. So let's start intentionally broad here. When folks hear finance and venture or private equity, it can be a bit unclear as to what that actually means. So how would you define your role and how would you define the finance function at 9 Yards Capital?
Yeah, absolutely. At the venture capital and private equity space, finance is actually not real finance the way that somebody else thinks about finance, right? At the back office, we don't do investing. We don't do fundraising. We do just about everything else. But in terms of the actual financing, as in the financing of the portfolio companies and providing them money so that they can grow, we are not involved in that decision process to see which portfolio company we finance and which ones do we not.
You know, how would you define your role and the major responsibilities across your day-to-day?
It might be easier to think about what I don't do as opposed to what I do. So in a venture or private equity firm, what we do is the core business is to get money from investors and figure out which companies to invest that pool of money into, right? And so we are not the finance department, the finance function, or the CFO, or the VP of finance, or the back office is not involved in that decision process. And then also, it's not involved in that decision process, and it's also not involved in the finding of investors. That falls into the investor relations department. So what is left? Well, there's a lot of stuff that is left. There's legal, there's paying the rent, there is fund administration, there is internal accounting, for the management company, there is IT, HR. A big one is SEC compliance and accounts payable, things of that nature. So that is everything that's involved in a fund that is not investing or investing. So if that makes any sense.
It does. And there's a whole lot there that it seems like you have to shoulder, and we'll come back to some specific examples. The idea of a fund is often, in our mind, that it's made up of a series of networks. And success as a fund manager, based on the experience that we see, is basically how efficiently you connect and network these providers. So this is a combination of effective communication and efficient infrastructure. Now, needless to say, Flow can provide the infrastructure angle, but on the communication side, what are some best practices you can share about how you get the most out of your vendors in the day-to-day?
Right. So the back office actually uses tons of vendors. We probably use more vendors than the front office being, the investment department. So in the back office, we have financial accounting, where we can outsource to external accountants if we don't have the firepower internally. We have legal. Some bigger firms will have a internal counsel. We have an external counsel, and a lot of firms do have external counsel as well. The general purpose is when there's not enough work to keep a full-time person busy, then you tend to outsource it. However, there comes to a point where at the growth of the company, where when you outgrow your external service provider and you need somebody internal to sort of manage that process, either to take that process in-house or to manage the external vendors, you would have that person. So for example, 9yards, in the very beginning, I wasn't here, right? It was just the investment folks that were here. 9yards grew to a point where the investment folks cannot manage all the external vendors. And then they hire somebody like me to sort of manage that. Me being an accountant by trade, I have an accountant within the venture capital private equity industry. I have connections with all the vendors, right? With that said, my relationship with the vendors, that relationship, it's a human business, right? So I come from the external sort of service business. I come from fund administration. So a fund administration, just like a law firm or a audit firm or a tax firm, there's a team that serves a certain client, right? And depending on whether that team is good within the service provider, that the client can have a very different experience from very good to very poor, depending on, because despite that, the audit firm, despite that they try to hire good people, they cannot control that every manager is just as good as any other manager, right? So the key for a firm like us is to know, which firm to go to, and then within that firm, who do you know that can manage the clients better than his peers? And once you know that, you can go to him and request a specific him or her to service you. I think that is the key to getting great service.
Sure. And let's talk about that. You had a decade of experience at a massive fund administrator, and I'm sure you came across countless GPs over the years. What are some pieces to the secret sauce or recipes for the secret sauce where GPs can get the most bang for their buck as they're engaging these providers?
Right. So you have these service providers and any different service provider. Like, for example, I come from a company called Standish Management. In the fund administration space, that is more of a premium provider. So we have a brand and we provide service that is we do more for our clients than some of our peers, and we charge accordingly, right? When we do that, some of that is fluff and some of that is not, right, across the industry. So to take a parallel in legal, you can go to a very expensive legal firm or you can go to a cheaper legal firm. And then, again, like I answered earlier, if there's a particular lawyer at a cheaper firm, if he's really, really strong, he may be able to service you at a cheaper price than a poor service provider at a poor lawyer at a better law firm that charges more, right? So I think that's sort of the key as well.
Got it. Yeah. And we come across, through our partner ecosystem, and I'm internally grateful for a lot of our partners here. Often we stumble across these discount providers in the market. And it's very easy, and perhaps the simplest way out, to engage a discount provider or a set of discount providers and call it a day. So with so many on the market that are waving these shiny objects, with a target on emerging managers, frankly, how do you think about balancing cost and quality? And in your mind, what are some of the key risks associated with engaging a kind of low-cost discount provider nowadays?
My wife and I were talking about this the other day. I have a Camry that the seat is not very well adjustable, whereas she has a Beamer that there's infinite adjustments on the seat. And she sits in my car and she's like, hey, you know what? The seat feels pretty good. You cannot adjust it, but it feels pretty good, right? So what I'm trying to say is that in this marketplace, there's a lot of things that people are selling that you don't need. And so you do need to know what you need or you don't need. And that comes with experience, right? So if you're a first-time manager who's not very well-versed in the wide array of services that the industry provides, you go to one service provider and that service provider says, I can provide this and that and this and this and that. First of all, you don't even know whether they can provide all that list of things that you need that they say they can provide. And second, you may or may not need that entire list. I don't need, in a Beamer chair, I don't need the adjustability between my upper back and lower back. You know what I mean? For fund administration, maybe they're experts at distributing stock, right? If your strategy doesn't involve distributing stock, you may or may not want that. And so if you were to say, okay, this is all the list of items that you provide, I don't need this, this, and this. Can I have a discount on your sticker price? So I think that's a fairly reasonable and efficient way of doing business with your service providers.
Got it. So in other words, if you look at the bottom line, you could potentially revert back to the provider to say, I don't really need all of this. Now, what can we do if we remove X, Y, or Z?
If I remove X, Y, and Z, can you give me a discount on your quoted price, right? Because that's less service that you're providing, that's less time that you're spending on us versus your other typical client that you're quoting on. So let's work out a deal.
Fantastic. So let's switch gears a little bit here. I think the communication side of it really carries two boundaries. You have the external communication with the providers, but then you have your internal communication. And I speak with a massive number of GPs. They're all fabulous, by the way. So if you're listening in, many of them are operating in silos. So oftentimes that means they don't really know what others across the organization are doing from the front to the back office. In your mind, what have you found to be the best communication tools and tactics internally to ensure that everybody's in sync, even throughout a distributed remote workforce, as much of us operate in today?
Yeah, so we have Monday morning meetings, just like I'm sure like every other firm does. For the Monday morning meeting at the firm, I'm allotted some time to talk about what's going on in the back office that's relevant to the front office. So I take advantage of that. Also, in addition, whenever somebody new comes into the firm, if they're in the front office, I do sit down with them to let them know these are the services that back office is providing for you. Come to us if you need help with this or that, right? Like, for example, when the front office is trying to invest in a company and they decide that, okay, we're going to invest X amount into company XYZ. As soon as they decide that, the front office can hand that to the back office and say, okay, hey, Hunter, we've decided this is the email that the CEO or CFO at company XYZ, meet Hunter, he's our VP of Finance, he can take you through the rest of the process. In which case, I can get the signature for that legal doc from our managing directors. I can arrange the payments. I can accept the certificates, all that stuff, all that process, right? So basically, where does the front office end and where does the back office begin? And simultaneously, same thing, where does the investor relations department and where does the back office begin? Once the investor relations department finds a investor that is willing to commit $1 million to us, at that point, they can introduce to me and I can take over from there. I can get the sub-doc signed, I can get the sub-doc executed, cap calls and all that stuff, right? So that's fairly important to communicate exactly how we can help the company to everybody in the company, right? So all the way from presumably the managing directors who hired me, they know, but not everybody else know underneath. And it's important for the back office to communicate that to everybody in the front office and investor relations of what we do to align their work.
Yeah. So I noticed that thematically, the Monday morning meeting is doing a few things. It's unblocking people for the rest of the week. It's addressing these red hot risks or these white hot risks that could effectively hold up closing or could hold up some integral part of the fund. I guess what happens if things go wrong? What's an example, perhaps hypothetical or otherwise, where there is poor communication and something is not handled in a timely manner? Can you walk me through a situation so that folks can be mindful and avoid that?
Yeah, absolutely. So like on a Monday morning meeting, once that process is passed from the front office to me and I run into trouble, right? I can either reach out live or I can reach out if it's a much wider problem, I'll reach out during the Monday morning meeting when everybody is on call, right? I'll say, hey, so-and-so LP, prospective LP is having this trouble, right? They're having tax issues, or they're having funding issues, or they're still having trouble determining which investment or which entity they want to invest into our fund with. One of these, if any of these issues come up, then I can talk to the investment team, and then the investment team and I can decide on how to move forward with it. Do I continue the conversation with the prospective LP, or do they take over, or whatever needs to be done? And simultaneously with the portfolio company, right? If the portfolio company is not ready. You've committed our money into the portfolio company. The portfolio company has to, drag their feet a little longer to do their close. I'll update the front office to say, hey, 2 weeks ago or 1 week ago, you gave me pass along. It hasn't funded yet. This is the reason why it hasn't funded. I expect it to be funded at this time. Or I was told that they're expected to be funded at this time. So therefore, this communication is often two ways, right? It's but the front office needs to know, because once they pass that process on to me, they pass that process on to me when they think that they're done. The rest of the process, I need to take it to finish line, right? If I cannot take it to finish line, I need to speak up about it. I need to figure out what needs to be done. And often that involves the front office.
Interesting. So it seems like the communication then is basically handled through this, let's say, early week meeting. Let's talk a little bit more about technology and infrastructure. I guess we're thinking a lot about human processes, manual processes. How have you found technology to contribute to or accelerate the work you're doing?
Yeah, overall, the technology is good, but it's not quite there yet, right? As an accountant, I've heard that like a decade ago, the decade to follow, accountants won't be needed. Close will be automatic. Cap calls will be automatic. You push a button and you say, oh, I want to do a 5% cap call. You push a button and all the cap calls goes out to all the LPs and there's no problem. So we're not even close to there yet. It's still a fairly manual process. The entire back office is fairly manual process. So, and I appreciate that, Flow has these softwares in place that makes things a little easier, or makes things a lot easier actually. Like for example, Flow has a that takes the LP through the subscription document. Often the subscription document can be kind of confusing, especially for first-time investors. Do I check this box or do I check that box? If I check this box, does the rest of the question need to be answered? Things of that nature. So Flow does a really good job of that. I do appreciate it, but that's just one step, right? There's many other things that I would imagine that needs to be automated, but are not quite there yet.
Absolutely. And I think getting there, pioneering in the space, it's a lot of work, but somebody's got to do it. So the last question I have for you has to do with a little bit of a postmortem. So often when we jump into a new role, fast forward a few years, you look back and you think, I really wish I knew this a couple of years ago. It would have simplified my life and avoided a lot of mistakes. So let's start from when you transitioned over from Standish into 9 Yards. What are some things you know today that you really wish you knew on day one that would have simplified your life?
In my current position, my counterparts at other firms, they can come from a wide array of different backgrounds. Fund administration, or Big Four, or even on the consulting side, I've seen people in my position coming from and those are fairly different sort of fields, right? Despite being fund administration and Big Four overall accounting, it's actually kind of different. Big Four is from the audit side, it's you're proofreading what other people have done, whereas fund administration, you're actually doing it. But I guess what I'm trying to say is my position, it's fairly consistent what we do from fund to fund, right? These funds are structured in a way that over the decades, they've created itself to be a certain way, form of function. Over the decades, the industry discovered that this is the best way to go about doing something. That's the way that these funds are formed, right? And so my counterparts and I do pretty much the same thing at each of our respective firms. Unless we sort of climb up from this position ourselves within a fund, there's quite a bit to learn once you get here, right? So I come from fund administration. Fund administration does work for the fund, but it doesn't do work for the management company, right? Or the GP&T or what have you. We're a very sort of focused part of what I do right now. The best way, I believe, to get around that is to have your network of other counterparts at this firm, right? Because the best practice of what we do is not necessarily top secret. It's not the same thing as whether you're investing into this company at this valuation or that company at that valuation, right? So what we do is fairly transferable. So if I have a network of people who are also in my position, I can call them up. I often do to say, hey, I've seen this situation come up. my LP is asking me about this, or my portfolio company is asking about this, or my GP is asking me about that. What is the best practice here? Like, for example, expenses for a fund, it's very vague, and it's all industry norm, right? And to understand what that industry norm is, it's a good idea to know and be friends with counterparts who have done this longer than you have. And I've been here for about 2 years now. I'm not a veteran, but I am getting there. And I do have younger folks that just got into a similar position or at a different firm who calls me up all the time to ask me what's the best practice. So it's give some and you take some.
So find a network, find a mentor, and become a mentor.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's not necessarily one mentor. It can be, a set, right? Even your peers people that, because what we do here in the back office is so diverse that it's all a matter of whether you've seen it. If you've done it before or you've seen it before, you've seen the situation, it's easy. You'll just do it, right? And if you haven't, then you got to figure it out. And figuring it out by yourself is not necessarily the best way. You should consult somebody who's done it before, and that's usually a counterpart at a different firm. So you can text around and say, hey, I ran into this situation, or email around. Text is, as an RIA, we should text. Email around and say, hey, I ran into this situation. Have you guys run into this situation? If you have, what did you do about it, right? And so you'll get an answer back, and then usually you'll get more than one answer back, and they're fairly consistent. Why are they consistent? It's because of the industry norm, right?
Absolutely. The further I get into venture, the more I realize it's such a small world and you can lean on others for support. Hunter, this has been fun. Thank you so much for your time and sharing this wisdom. And for everybody else, thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening to Calling Capital, a podcast by Flow. Be sure to follow us on LinkedIn to never miss an episode. See you next time.